Now, normally, as a modeler, when you're building models for games, you're going to be working from some sort of reference, especially for the character stuff. And for the game that we used for our example, we wanted to do something sort of whimsical with kind of a ghostly night kind of theme. So we wanted to work up some sketches. So Kurt did that and worked up some variations, kind of a Castle Crashers sort of proportion with a really big head, different weapon variations, different helmets and things like that. And we went in and kind of picked out the elements that we liked. And then he worked up a little bit more of a detailed drawing. Now, the character that we wanted to create, we wanted to match up eventually with a painted background. So we wanted to be kind of a 2.5D look. So some of the elements will be 3D, and some of the elements will be 2D. We wanted to combine those. And so that we wanted the textures for sure to sort of have a similar feel to the 2D. And so this is kind of the direction that we wanted to go. So from here, we can start to actually build some of these pieces. And you can just break these down visually. You can see we don't really have any connective tissue here, but we have kind of the tunic shape, the body shape, the feet, the hands, the helmet's going to be a major thing. And also, we need to build the sword. So to start, we just jump into Maya LT. LT actually has a lot of modeling tools available to you. If you've used Maya before, the full version of Maya, you're not going to be losing a whole lot when you're talking about modeling. There's a lot of the tools here, and we'll talk about in a second tools that you may think wouldn't even move over to something focused on games, but end up being really, really useful. And so to start, you would typically come in, and for the body, let's say we would bring in a polygon primitive, and I would just use a cube. And I don't like to have this interactive creation on. I just like to pop it into the scene, and you can see the cube here. I'll just come into the creation node and just drop in a few divisions here. Maybe not that many. Something like that. And usually you won't always want to set this before you actually start pushing and pulling points. So right click, and I can just go into component mode, and I can look at this, start to move up some of these points to make kind of the shoulder shape. And then in here, as the back sort of comes in, if you want to work from the side view to do this, just to make sure you've got everything selected correctly, you can do that too. Come in here and pull this back a little bit to make this sort of chest shape. Now, it's always going to be sort of cube shaped unless you come in and really start to take these corners down. So I'll take these and I'm going to push them back in. We can even scale them in that way and just start to round it off a little bit. I do like the topology that this gives us, but the shape will have to get away from that square shape a little bit as we go through. So you can begin to shape it just like that. Okay, you can also, just using edge, you could select this entire edge just by double clicking, and then you could scale it down if you wanted to taper that a little bit. Same thing here. You can kind of taper that down and start to get your kind of overall shape. So we're working with such low resolution that it's really easy to come in and change things if we need to. Now for the armholes, we want this to look like an empty tunic. And so let's select the faces where we want that armhole to be. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. You could also cut this in half and mirror it or work with symmetry. But one of the things to be aware of, we want to extrude this in. But in the newer versions of Maya, you want to be a little bit careful if you've used Maya before, just because now we have, if we go to Edit Mesh, we have these different sections. So we have vertex, edge, and face, and each one has its own extrude. So for instance, if I pick the extrude, if I just kind of look down here and say, oh, there's extrude, I extrude that out, you can see I'm not really getting what I want. And so what I want to do is make sure to pick the face extrude, so down in this section. So definitely be aware of that. So I can now come in and extrude this. I'll click on the little cube here and push this in. And then I can do it again just by hitting G on the keyboard, and I can push it in. Now, one thing to kind of be aware of, let's just select these faces down here at the bottom. And I want to create a little bit of a rim around this. So I'll do another extrude, and we'll kind of scale this in a little bit. Okay, So now if I select that entire loop, let's say I want to extrude these, but I want to extrude them separately. So I want to do it all at the same time, but I don't want them to be connected. Now in the past you've had this keep faces together option that's been up here, and you'll notice that we don't see that up here. We access it in a slightly different way. So in some ways it's a little bit, it's actually better because you're not accidentally leaving it on. And so what we can do is simply go to Face, Extrude, and we can pull this down. And then with that still active, we can hit Control-Shift, right-click, and we can toggle Keep Faces Together. So if we toggle that off and then kind of scale this down, you can see that those are actually separated. Okay, we're still active. We can toggle that back on. So, you know, we've toggled this off, let's say, and done an extrude. Now, if we go in and do another extrude, let's maybe come in here at the top where the neck would be, and we do another extrude, and we kind of push it down, we scale it in. You can see that each time you have to set that keep faces together. So it's a little bit hard to find if you don't know where it is, but it's actually good because you're not accidentally leaving that off. So, you know, if I had that off and I extruded that down and I wasn't aware of the fact that it was off, I could get some really weird geometry in there. So that's where you can find that if you're looking for it. So that's how we can create kind of a start to create a simple body, and then you go in and create the other elements. If we turn this on, you can see here is what we've got so far with this. So you can see here's the body, which has a little bit more shape to it, but you can see the bottom extruded out separately like that. We kind of skipped over different faces to get the kind of scalloped look at the bottom. Now, one of the neat things that I wanted to talk about in Maya LT is the fact that you actually still have the ability to use NURBS. Now, you're not going to be using NURBS geometry as is in your games, right? But you can use the NURBS curves and NURBS surfaces to get some shapes that might be a little bit more difficult to get otherwise. So for instance, we want to create the face guard for this guy. So let's go into the top view here. And so we can kind of see the helmet right here, and here's sort of the ear pieces here, the hinges. So what I want to do is come in and let's create, and you can do this by cutting apart a circle, or you can just come in and create an arc. And so I'm just going to start by clicking here. Actually, let me undo that. Try that again. Okay, I want to click over here and kind of up here and then over here. And that gives us sort of our rough arc shape. Now, right now, you can see the resolution of that arc, and we can also go into our attribute editor and see that it's got 8 spans. So what I want to do is kind of rebuild this real quickly. So I'm going to go into our NURBS menu set, and let's go to Edit Curves. Let's rebuild curve, and I'm just going to set this number of spans to 12. Just so it's a little bit higher res. Now I want it to sort of come to a point, so I'll take these points in here, kind of make a point, bring that out a little bit. You can see that we're off center a little bit, so just want to be careful of that. Kind of scale this in. Okay, and let's bring these forward and in, because I really want there to be kind of a nice sharp point here. All right, so if we come back here, this is what our initial curve looks like. So we'll kind of bring this up into position for kind of our face guard. So now what we can do is just duplicate this. So Control D to duplicate. I'm going to rotate this one up a little bit and actually move it up slightly as well. Let's do the same thing with this one. We'll duplicate that one and let's rotate it down a little. So that gives us the curve that fits with the helmet, right? And also the point on the front. We can also kind of move this back a little bit, and this one as well. Okay, and now the fact that we duplicated these helps because they have identical parameterization and span, so we can say click these in order. We'll click all three of these, and then again in the NURBS menu set we can go to NURBS, and we just do a loft, and we'll go in here, and I'm just going to reset all this down. Now if you want to, you can output polygons. We're going to go ahead and output NURBS, and then you can also look at the number of section spans. So if we go ahead and apply this, you can see that it's just going from here to here, and so we don't get anything between. So if we add a section span in there, you can see you can get a little bit more detail in there. And anytime you can go in and tweak those curves to get what you want. All right, so once we've got our NURBS geometry, which was really easy to create, if we were doing this with polygons, it might be a little bit more tedious to do. We can convert this now. So go to modify. We've got the NURBS geometry selected, so we'll go NURBS to polygons. And so I want to choose, in my case, quads. And for the tessellation method, I'm going to choose general. And let's choose per span number of isoparms. So for every span, we're going to have a specific number, and you can experiment a little bit to get the numbers right, because one direction is going to be going this way and one direction is going to be going this way, the U and the V. So let's for now set this to 2 and see what happens. So let's go ahead and tessellate it, and I'm going to turn off NURBS surface, and so here we get a polygon object. Now you can see here that it's black on the outside. So what I want to do is reverse the normals on this. So we're going to go to polygons, normals, and let's reverse those. Now before I start to add the slots in here, I want to add some thickness to this. So let's do an extrude with the faces. So we'll just do an extrude, and let's kind of push it in here. Now you can see since we've done that, it's reversed the normals again since we went this way. So if that happens, really easy to kind of come in and fix that. All right. Now I want to turn on the wireframe on shaded right up here, just so I can see the actual wire that we're working with. And now from here, we can start to add those insets. And so we can come in here and select, different rows here. And we wanted to have enough resolution that we had some separation between them. So I'll just come in and select those. All right, now anytime that I extrude a kind of an inset in like this, I always want to do a bit of an inset first. So I want to have a nice edge around here. So to do that, we just want to hit extrude, again, face extrude. And we just want to go to scale, and I'm going to use the light blue scale in the center, and we'll just scale those in, and you can see how that makes a nice rim around there. Now normally that's if you are going to be smoothing this, so if you're going to be subdividing it or smoothing it. Now we're taking this into a game engine, so we're not going to be doing that, so we won't need them for that reason, but I will be able to use those for kind of a bevel in this case. So rather than beveling all the edges, we can now just take those edges that we scaled in, and we can kind of push those in, which has the effect of creating a little bit of a bevel there. Now we maybe pushed them in a little bit too much. Okay, now we can hit G to repeat that extrude, and then we can push that in a little bit. So it gives us a little bit of kind of a bevel on that. So it's not a completely sharp line there. And then you can add kind of a flat black to the texture in there to kind of block it out or black it out. So let's take a look at kind of the finished product here. If I turn this off, and let's turn our hardware texturing on. So that's kind of what we got as far as the, we ended up changing the color scheme a little bit, painting in some kind of armor plates and things like that. But you can see here's the face guard here, and we're able to kind of flop it up and down when he's running, give him a kind of a more of a fun look as he's running around. So, you know, my LT has all the polygon tools that you want, and even the NURBS tools that really make building some of these pieces a lot easier. Also, we did run into some issues with previous versions of LT where we had maybe geometry that was penetrating, so we were trying to black it out. It wasn't necessarily connected, so we had some objects that were penetrating, and the skinning method didn't like it. But that there's an updated method now that that doesn't really matter. The geodesic voxel binding, I think it's called, makes it so you don't have to worry about that. So if you've had issues with that in the past, shouldn't be a problem now. So the next thing that we'll talk about are some of the UV tools that we can use in Maya LT. Let's start by talking about the new unfold functionality. So let's jump into the UV texture editor here. And you can see obviously that we've already got some UVs on this guy, but if we select one of these and I just click on this, let me turn off the image. So we've got a shell selected. You can see if I click on this unfold, it's going to actually take those pieces and lay them out and unfold them onto the tile, which is not something you're used to with regular unfold. And so if we go into Polygon Unfold and open the options, you can see it's actually using this unfold method. Now, if you don't see this, you may need to turn on unfold, and you can do that just by activating it in the plugin manager. Just make sure it's loaded if you're not seeing that. And so what we have here is a new unfold. We can still go back and use the legacy unfold if we want to, but this just gives us the option to get this nice clean kind of unfold happening here. And this is now, that unfold is connected to this unfold button. So there's a few other tools that are kind of cool that we can use to kind of make sure our UVs are the way that we want. So let's say we want to just make sure that we've got a nice grid on here and they're not distorted. Well, we can just hit this little button right here for this checkered tiles, and it shows you, even in the 3D view, it shows you an image of that, so you can make sure that everything is, you know, the way that you would want. Now you can see up here we've got a few of these little buttons here, so I can come into tweak UVs, and I can tweak UVs just by clicking on them and moving them. So I don't have to select and go to move. I can come in here and just click and drag them if I want to. I can also come in here and, for instance, I can select the shortest path, which I have actually used. So we can select a UV here and maybe here, and it'll select the shortest path to that UV. Okay, so that's the tweak. There's the shortest path. We've also got smudge, which we can come in here and use as kind of a painting technique. You know, you're using it like a brush, kind of smudging those UVs around. So that can be useful to you as well. All right, now for a character that is as low res as this guy, we're probably going to want to have the UVs on one tile, right? On one tile. So take one texture, will take care of his whole body. But let's say for some reason that we wanted to spend a lot more time, a lot more pixels on the, for instance, his face guard here, just like we've done here. So we've increased it to a whole tile, but we don't want it to be on that initial tile. We want to move it to a new tile. So first we want to be able to see the tiles. So to do that, we can go into View. We'll go into our grid. And right now it's set to 1 unit. So each unit is from here to here. So let's say we'll set it to 10 units. Okay, and then we can apply that. And you can see that expands it out. Now I want to see the borders of each individual tile, so I'll turn on Tiles and apply that. And that gives us each tile. So if we're doing a multi-tile texture, then we can set it up that way. Now in the past, you've been able to use these values up here to move UV shells to different tiles. All right, so you've been able to kind of put numbers in and do it. But here, we can just leave that set to 1, and we've got these arrows here, and I can just select these, and I can move them really quickly and easily. Really easily. And so, you know, I can get it, let's say it's a little bit too big, so I'll kind of scale it down, and then we can move it into that exact point on the next tile. Or, if all our U tiles are full up to 10, we can go into the next tile in this row. Okay, and one of the nice things is we turn this on, and you can see that the tiles are actually labeled. So we know this one's U1 V2. Here's our initial one, U1 V1. So in addition to giving you the checkerboard, it's telling you what tile you're actually on, which is kind of useful, especially if you're working with multiple objects. So you've got these on this tile, you've got these on this tile to be able to dedicate more pixels to, and you can move those around really easily. Okay, so you can see I do have to have the UVs selected so it knows what to move. But if I wanted to, I could just move that one. But basically whatever shell we have selected. So once you have your UVs laid out the way that you want, you can come in and start to create your textures, and you can paint textures in Photoshop. If you want to come in, take a UV snapshot, send that out, and you can paint those in Photoshop. You could also take it to Mudbox and paint your textures that way, and bring those back in, and then you can apply them here. You can see we've just got a shader in here with these elements added in. So for the color and the spec. So a fairly straightforward process for this little guy, because he's just a very simple model built completely in Maya LT. Now what if we're working with something that is coming from a sculpt? So you're doing maybe a more realistic game that has more realistic characters. You've got sculpted hero characters or monsters or something that you've built or sculpted in Mudbox, let's say, and you want to bring those over and actually create a game mesh from those. Now that's going to be a little bit more complicated, but next let's actually take a look at that. So we'll take a look at the Reat Apology tools here in Maya LT, and then also some of the map making functionality so that we can get that detail out as maps. So if you're not familiar with what Reat Apology is, it's sort of the act of taking a very high resolution mesh that maybe you've sculpted in Mudbox or ZBrush, and you've added a lot of detail to, but it's not usable because there's just so many polygons. So what you do is you go in and recreate your optimized game res mesh over the top of it. So it's snapped to the surface. You can choose what the topology looks like, how the edges flow, and you know that it's going to be snapped to that high-res surface. So it reflects it, and then you can go in and bake maps based on that so that you have something you're able to rig and animate and actually use that looks like the thing that you sculpted. So obviously on something like this, we don't need to do that sort of retopology. We've created the initial topology ourselves. So if you're doing something cartoony, probably don't need to go through that process. You can create it all here in Maya LT, do the textures, and you're good to go. But let's say we're working with something that's a little bit more realistic or a little bit more high res. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new file here. And let's just open up this bird. And let me try that again. There we go. Okay. So we're going to open up this bird geometry. And this is actually a creature from one of our courses, creating a fantasy creature from concept art is what it's called. Lee Magalhaes takes you through the process of creating this, and it's based on an original concept that Anthony Jones did in 2D. So that's where this comes from. But let's say that we have this object that we've sculpted in another application, and we want to now create a game res mesh. Let's take a look and see what the mesh itself looks like. Let me turn off the referencing. And you can see that this mesh is really dense, and it's triangulated. Definitely not optimized for use inside of a game engine, right? So this could be reduced from Mudbox. It could be decimated from ZBrush. The key thing is, though, that we want our model to look like this, but we don't want all of those polygons there. We want to have our own optimized topology. So how do we go about doing this? We're going to use the modeling toolkit. It can be accessed right up here in the upper right of the interface. If I just click on that and come down to the bottom, there's a tool called QuadDraw, which is the one that we're going to use. But first, we have to tell Maya that we want this to be the object that all of our geometry is going to snap to. Now, in the past, we've done that by choosing a transform constraint and putting the object in there. But in this version going forward, we're going to actually make this live. So if you've used Maya before, you're familiar with Make Live probably. It's, you know, taking an object and making it so you can do other things that are constrained to that object. And so that's sort of been consolidated. And so now all we have to do is select the object. And we can either go to Modify, Make Live, or we can come up here. You can see this little magnet right up at the top. We can use that as well. And it lets you know what object currently is live and the fact that it is live. So this is going to be our sort of background image that we are drawing on top of. So let's now activate QuadDraw. So we'll turn that on. And from this point, there's a lot of things we can do simply staying inside of QuadDraw as far as adding our topology. Let's take a look here at just starting out. So the first thing we'll probably want to do is just add some points. All right, so we can just click anywhere on the surface from any angle, and you can see I can add these green points. And if you rotate around, you'll see they are actually snapped to the surface. And I can come at any angle, and I can add these points anywhere. They're not connected right now by anything, so I can really put them wherever I want. But in my mind, I'm kind of thinking about how I want the edges to flow. Okay, so to add actual quads or four-sided polygons, we can just hold down Shift and hover between these 4 points. And you can see if I move slightly, the actual 4 points that it uses will change. So, you know, you can kind of think about the position, and if it's a little bit off, you know, if you want those here, then you can actually start to move those around. So I can just click on those to move them around if I want them to actually connect up right there. So it's a very flexible way to work, but just holding down Shift, I can click and click through to just add those points. So now, as long as I'm in this QuadDraw tool, I can continue to add these here. I can come off to the side, add 2 points, and anywhere where we've got 4 points, it's going to try to add that quad. Now, I can come in here at any time and start to move these around with the left or middle mouse buttons. I can hold down Shift, and it'll take me into relax mode, and I can just kind of paint across this to relax it down. And I can also start to add edge loops in here. So let's say that I have added some points, and I've realized that, you know what, this gap is too big. I need to add another edge in there. So what you can do is hit Control left mouse button, and you can see the highlight there. So I can just drop that in wherever I want, and it'll again snap to the surface. Then I can Shift, click to smooth it out, or just move it around manually. So you can really get your topology drawn out pretty quickly, depending on, of course, the complexity of your model. Also, if you do the same thing, if you hit Control but you use the middle mouse button, it will actually add it to the center. So let me try here. So that added it to the side. If I do middle mouse, you can see it snaps it right to the center line. So if you know you want your line to be right in the middle, you can use the Control middle mouse button. Now, if you have trouble remembering what all the keys are, there's an easy way to find out. If you go to Options, Modeling Toolkit Preferences, and go all the way to the bottom, you can also access this just by going into Preferences, Modeling Toolkit. You'll see that there's a list here. This is based on the default preset. And the first list, or the first entry in the list, is for if you're hovering over the actual mesh. And after the slash, it's what happens if you're not on the mesh. So different things will happen based on whether you're on the mesh or off the mesh. So you got left mouse button, Shift left mouse button, so on and so forth. Now, Control Shift left mouse button will allow you to delete faces or loops. And we haven't looked at that. And then also the Tab key. So let's look at Control Shift left mouse button. You can see the X kind of gives you a clue on what's going to happen. If I click on this loop, it'll delete that entire thing. Okay, I can then go in and hit Control and start to add more loops in there and come in and then relax it or tweak it. Okay, I think I need another edge right in there, so I can come in and do that as well. But you can go in and anytime you can use that Control-Shift left mouse button to start to delete entire loops, or oops, depending on what you have selected there. All right, now let's look at tab. So tab does something different based on if you're on the mesh or not. So I'm going to hit tab, and I can just extend out edges. Now, if you'll take a look at this, as I extend this out, you can see it's separated from the one to the right of it. If I move it closer, it's going to snap to that edge. So we've got auto weld turned on. If you take a look at QuadDraw and you come down here, you can see auto weld's currently turned on. So that enables you to come in and snap different points to one another. Okay, so I can extend out edges. If I hit tab over this edge and I right click, I can also bring up some options here in the form of this marking menu where I can extend entire loops. And so I could extend a whole loop, and it can really speed up, you know, your work. If you're working on a large expanse of geometry, being able to extend that out really helps. Now, what if you're kind of initially drawing out the geometry? For instance, this neck is a pretty big expanse, and we know pretty much what the topology is supposed to look like here. So what we can do is use tab off of the surface, and you can see we get this floating polygon here. What I can do is click and drag in the direction that I want, and it'll create this quad strip. If I hold down tab and use my middle mouse button, I can scale up the quads that will be used in the strip. Okay, and I can drag those down. Now keep in mind that there is sort of a directionality to this. So if I come over to this side and I hit tab, you can see that my cursor is sitting on one side of this quad, sort of pulling it around. So just something to be aware of. If you plan on drawing your quad strip down the neck, you don't want to start from this position. So if I come down here, you can see I get sort of an overlapping quad here that I'll have to go in and try to fix if I can grab it. Okay, so not the best way to do it. So what you want to do is make sure that you're facing the right direction. So if I'm going to be coming down this way, I'll just come up here and kind of move my mouse in a downward direction until I'm at the bottom, and then I can do it that way. You know, same thing if I'm going up here, I want to just start, you know, in that direction, and then I can go up. And so I just make sure I don't get that overlap. Okay, now you can, this is good for kind of laying down big expanses of geometry, but then you can go back in with Shift and start to connect up, you know, any of these where we've got, anywhere you've got 4 points, you know, you can start to connect that up, and then you can come in and use Shift to relax your mesh a little bit after the fact, get it nice and clean. So, you know, you could actually also use this if you have a piece of geometry that you've already got parts of it that you know, maybe you've already got the arms, or maybe you've already got parts of the body. You know, if you've got that geometry, you can actually use that as well. So all you have to do is have that geometry active here. So we've got this, let's say we've got this low geometry that's pretty much most of the character. But then I activate the modeling toolkit, turn on QuadDraw, and so, you know, I can come in here now and start to move this geometry around and edit this geometry that I've got here. Okay, you can see I've got some of those sort of leftover points there. So if you have an object where you know, maybe you've got a section of it that you like the topology on, and you don't want to have to kind of recreate that, all you have to do is have that, you know, active, and then turn on QuadDraw, and you can begin to edit that. So that's fine for most of this, but what about this tail? I mean, this tail would be pretty tedious to actually start to work with. Let me get rid of this for a second. We'll show you how to make this mesh here in a second. But let's say that we're just doing it traditionally. So, you know, we've got this mesh, and now we can come in and turn on QuadDraw, and maybe I want to start to extend some edges, so I'll extend the border. I can come in and start to extend a border, you know, kind of like that. that'll work for a while, but it's even how fast that is, it's going to be pretty tedious to come down all the way. So what you can do is start to create your own meshes that you can eventually use as a base for this. So in this case, we've got a couple of curves here. Let me turn off the low for now. Make sure that my NURBS curves are on. And so what I've got is a curve that I've drawn out, just a simple NURBS curve that follows along with the tail. Okay, so you can kind of see it there. And then also I've added a circle. So a circle and a curve that follows the path of the tail. So what I can do is just take both of these, and we can go back into NURBS and we just do an extrude on that. And that gives you that NURBS geometry. Now it's the same, same radius there going all the way around the tail. It doesn't match it at all, but it's at least in the right position. Okay. So if we take a look at the piece that I just hid, so let's show, let me go in here and find it. So it's going to be this one. That's not it. It's actually on that low layer. So this was created in the same way that we did the face shield for the knight's helmet. So I just took that NURBS object and converted it into a polygon, and then I just filled in the ends, and you can do that using fill hole. If you go into polygons, you can come in and you can fill it, and then use the multi-cut tool in here to kind of tessellate that across, just to make a nice grid. But the idea is that you just want something that encloses this tail. All right. So now that we've got that geometry built from the curve, just by, again, doing the extrude, converting it to polygons, and then closing in the end. I left the other end open because we'll eventually want to connect it. We'll turn the high resolution back on. Okay, and it's still live. So with this tail selected, this high resolution geometry still live, let's go to Edit Shrinkwrap Selection, and we'll watch what happens here. So we're able to create some simple geometry that flows in a general way, like the tail, but now we're able to shrink wrap this. So this is great for limbs, things like the arms and legs, and in this case a tail. This would have been really, really tedious to do ourselves. And now we can come in and say, okay, this area isn't really perfect. So we'll go get back QuadDraw and come in and start to add a little bit more resolution here. We'll kind of start to smooth this out a little bit. And then you can really kind of customize it. Okay. Now this object itself is separate from the other low-res object. So at this point, you would come in. Let's delete those polygons that I built or that I added earlier. You could come in and combine these together. So take both of these, this one and this one, and we'll go to Mesh, and let's just combine it. Delete the history. And then if you want to just merge them, you can, or you can go back and use your QuadDraw to do it as well. Come in and just start to drag these points around a little bit. And you can see with auto weld, you can start to kind of snap those together. And you might need to go in and turn off your high res visibility, but you kind of get the idea where you can kind of snapping that together. And then, come in and start to add a couple more loops. And there you've got the tail. And it just speeds things up quite a bit when you're able to do that sort of shrink wrap. Now in this case, because it was asymmetrical and because it had this sort of curve in it, using a NURBS curve with an extrude made some sense. But, you could build your geometry any way that you want to and then do the shrink wrap. And that basically takes that topology and kind of smooshes it onto the high-res mesh so that the shape matches up. Well, now that we have our high res and then we have a low res that matches up and is the resolution that we want, the next thing that we want to do is bake out maps. And before we do that, we would want to set up a UV layout for our geometry. So in this case, if we take a look at this, you can see that it does have a UV layout over one tile. So the idea here is that we take the detail from this high resolution model, and you can see it does also have a color texture associated with it. We take that detail and we transfer the sculpted detail and the painted detail onto the low res. The low res has the right shape, and it's good for what we want to do as far as the rigging and animation and moving through the pipeline. We just need it to look more like this one, which means we'll have to bake out maps. So we'll bake out color maps to get the texture information, and we'll also bake out normal maps to get the detailed information. So to do this, we want to have both of them visible, and we're going to use Turtle. So there's a texture baking shelf here, and there's a couple of options right up here. Let me turn off this make live. Both of these correspond to up here in texture baking. We've got options in here as well. This is going to work on a layer-based approach. So what we want to do is go into the bake layer editor, and you can see that there's a default bake layer, and we can use this, or we can go ahead and create a new layer, which we'll do here. Now I want to edit the layer, and I'll just call this something like bird bake, and this just lets us save the target and source files and also some of the settings. So let's select the geometry that we want as the target. So the target is going to be the low res. So this is the high res, so we'll actually add that as the source, but let me turn this off for a second. Get our low res here added as the target. And then our high res is what we want to be the source. That's where it's going to look for the data. So we've got high and low and source and target. Okay, we'll leave everything else as is. We want to make sure both of these are on. Now we can go into the settings, and we can access those here if we want to. And we want to set our type to bake, and we want to go all the way over to the baking tab. And we're going to use the bird bake layer. We want to bake it to a texture. If you open up the targets, it's going to show you the geometry that you've already added. You've also got transfer settings, and if you've used any sort of baking functionality in other applications, and these are going to be pretty familiar to you, you can change the transfer space. For instance, if the objects aren't right on top of each other, you don't have to use world and so forth. You've also got settings like baking the shadows in alpha, and also you can, if you're doing a vertex bake, you've got those options. Your texture baking options, you can change the values here as far as the size of the texture that you want to create. You can save it to a file. Here's the directory it's going to save it into, and then the format that it's going to save it, and the file format here, the default UV range, and so forth. So I'm going to leave all that pretty much the same and go all the way down to outputs, and this is where we can decide what we want to actually output. Okay, so let me come down here under shader outputs. I'm going to turn this off. And so if we want to do strictly color without shading, we're going to do albedo. I think that's how you say it, albedo. Albedo. If you look up physically based rendering, you'll see some information about that. It's kind of related to color and diffuse, but it's a little bit different. But in this case, this is what we want to use for the strictly just the color. Okay, if we wanted to bake in lighting information, we could do that too, but I just want the color baked into a texture. So once we do that, all we have to do is hit this bake right over here. And then it'll go through, it'll bring up your render preview window, and it'll show you that bake in progress. So you can see this is the color, strictly just the color information baked out based on the UVs of the low res. So then you could take that and add it into your low res material. So if we turn this off, come in here, go into color, and choose file. And then we'll go find that image. And it's going to be in the Turtle Baked Textures directory. And I think it's going to be, let's see, this latest one here. I'll grab that. And so you can see the colors brought in. Now you can see it also has added transparency, which you can see is piped in there. I can break that connection to fix that. And then when we go back in to bake again, we can just come in here and turn off bake alpha, and then that won't happen. So there's also a couple of ways to do the ambient occlusion as well. If you want to do ambient occlusion, you can do custom and then this little box, and then we want to add the occlusion sampler into the slot there. The other way to do that would be to add that occlusion sampler to the high res and then bake out ambient. I think that'll do the same thing too, but this is the way that I normally do it. And so if we bake this, it should give us, and we want to again make sure that both of these are on. It's not going to work if they're invisible. And so this just has the occlusion. Let's do a bake and see what that does for us. So there you can see we get kind of an occlusion map, and you could use this in your texture creation if you wanted to, add that to your diffuse somehow. Sometimes people will combine that in, so you can get that sort of a map using that method. And again, the other method that I've used that seems to work is to actually add this shader to the high res before you bake, and then choose ambient to bake. So you can try that as well. Now for the normal map, we still don't have the normal map on there. So we can come down here. There's different kinds of normal displacement, directional occlusion, and things like that you can experiment with. But for the normal map, I'm just going to choose normal map, and I'm just going to leave everything else at default. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off as well. So now we're just baking the normal map. Come in here and hit bake. And then we should see our normal map begin to appear, and then we can apply it and see how that looks. So our normal map has been created. Now Turtle has gone ahead and saved that out. You can see I can't really save out images from here. It's just kind of giving us a preview. So what we can do now is come in and let's bring up our texture here, or our shader rather. We'll go into bump mapping and add a file. Set this to tangent space normals. Go into file just like you would any other normal map. And then we'll go into that same folder, add the normal map there. And you can see we get that detail coming through on our optimized, retopologized mesh. Now at this point, once you've got your assets created, whether you've created those like we did the Ghost Night, where we've done it all in Maya LT, or you've taken a sculpted mesh into Maya LT and done some retopology over the top of, and then maybe baked out some maps. Either way, the next thing you could do would be to go in and rig and animate it. And, I've kind of focused more on modeling in this webinar, but you have the ability to go in and do all the rigging and animation as well. I know for our project with the Ghost Night, Delano actually went in and did all the animation and all the cycles and everything. This is one particular one where it's his, what happens when he dies. So he gets lifted off the ground and he's kind of running his feet, and then his ghost kind of dissipates and all of his pieces fall down. So you can do all those cycles inside of my LT, and then when you're done, you can send that over to Unity very, very easily. So here, this is kind of a look at a setup in Unity and going into the actual gameplay where we've got all the pieces set up of the environment, and he's kind of running and jumping around with all of his animations, going up to fight the boss, and you can see we've added some effects there. And so very easy to do that from my LT over to Unity to get that up and going. So make sure to check it out. And I'm actually a little biased. Maybe personally, I like Maya just because that's kind of what I started with, and I've kind of gravitated to that, to the full version. And so Maya LT, it really incorporates a lot of the modeling tools, especially that I'm used to using. So it really appeals to me. So if you're looking for something like that, it definitely works as far as the price goes. I think it's $30 a month now, I believe. So not to sell it too much, but we really like using Maya LT, and especially cost-wise for maybe a small team working, it's going to be really appealing too. One last thing I did want to mention, if you're interested in going through the whole process of looking at going from design all the way to kind of integrating with Unity and creating a game, I would encourage you to check out our site. So it's over at Digital-Tutors.com, and this specifically is the indie game development pipeline. And there's 9 courses, I think, in this learning path, but it goes through the whole process from visual development and creating the artwork all the way through prototyping inside of Unity to some of the modeling stuff that we talked about, going through the hero and the boss, modeling and texturing, and then also rigging and animation for both those guys, and then integrating the assets, creating the gameplay and all that stuff. So ton of content over there if you want to check it out. I encourage you to do that. And the last thing, most important thing I want to say is that we just really thank you so much for spending some time with us today, going through some of the modeling functions in MyLT. It's really fun to work with, and we just appreciate your time so much. I think we are going to take some questions, but again, we appreciate you guys.